congressional hearing about the horror they experienced that day. Maya Cirillo, a fourth grader, described seeing her teacher and her classmates being shot and playing dead to stay alive.
We went to go hide behind my teacher's desk and behind the backpacks, and then he shot the little window, and then he went to the other classroom, and then he went, there's a door between our classrooms, and he went to there and shot my teacher and told my teacher good night and shot her in the head. And then he shot some of my classmates and the whiteboard. When I went to the backpacks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was gonna come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me. And
what did you do then when you put the blood on yourself?
Just stay quiet, and then I got my teacher's phone and called 911.
Now, the Justice Department will conduct a critical incident review of the law enforcement response to the shooting. And one of the big questions that needs to be answered, why did more than an hour's time pass from when the first officers followed the shooter into the building to when the shooter was killed? In the meantime, parents outside begging police to rush in, panicked children calling 911. Police Chief Pete Arredondo has been criticized for his response to the massacre, and he is now responding for the first time to questions about why there was such a delay in getting the gunman neutralized. Chief Arredondo says he didn't consider himself the incident commander. He told the Texas Tribune that he assumed someone else had taken control of the law enforcement response, and he contends that no officer at the scene hesitated to put themselves in danger. He told the Tribune that, quote, not a single responding officer ever hesitated, even for a moment, to put themselves at risk to save the children. We responded to the information that we had and had to adjust to whatever we faced. Our objective was to save as many lives as we could. And the extraction of the students from the classrooms by all that were involved saved over 500 of our Uvalde students and teachers before we gained access to the shooter and eliminated the threat, end quote. We have a very special guest joining us tonight. He is in Austin, Texas. He's a reporter for the Texas Tribune. James Barragan is joining us. James, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me on the show.
James, could we start with how Chief Arredondo talked to you about never thinking he was the incident commander, but in reporting that's been out there, he's been named as such. What can you share with us about what he related to you, please?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main topics that he wanted to touch on. Obviously, there's been major criticism of the incident commander and the incident commander's role in delaying a breaching of the classroom and issuing some type of order. Arredondo wanted to make clear in his interview with us that he never considered himself the incident commander and that he never issued an order. So he said if anybody was standing down on someone's order, that order did not come from me. And I think, another one of the things that he talked to us about was that he had left his police radios. That's been another of the topics that's received a lot of criticism and has been the topic of conversation. But I think it stands to reason that if he had left his radios behind, whether or not that is the right call or not, and there is criticism from law enforcement experts about that being the wrong call, but his point is if he didn't have his radios, how was he issuing orders?
Right. So that supports his position that he did not believe he was the commander. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, James, but was the rationale behind leaving the radios behind so that he could have both hands to hold his duty weapon?
That's correct. When he told us that when he arrived at Robb Elementary, he believed he was the first officer on the scene. And so he wanted to have both of his hands on his gun and run into the school as soon as possible to confront the gunman. He said he wanted to have both hands on his gun because that is the most accurate way to fire off a shot. And so he made the decision, and he's acknowledging it, to leave behind his police and his campus radios. Now, of course, that left him open to not being able to communicate with anybody else on the scene, not having communications with anybody else that was outside the scene and maybe could have directed issues. But that is the decision he made, and I expect that will be a bigger part of the conversation as we move forward in this investigation.
Certainly, James. Just an excellent piece that you put together for your newspaper, the Texas Tribune. And one of the big questions that you were able to answer through your reporting and through this exclusive interview with the chief was about the door being locked. He told you it was locked. What did he say, please?
Right. So that's been another one of the major topics of conversation about, they waited for more than an hour. Why couldn't they just break the door in, as we see police do in the newspapers and in TV shows? His response is that he had actually checked the door to try to see if he could get in and found the door to be locked. Now, this is an interesting point. This is not something that we at the Texas Tribune have been able to corroborate, but this is his account. But that points to the fact that some of the measures that we have taken as a society to prevent against active shooters actually work against police officers in this instance. So the way those doors work, they're specially designed so that if you're inside the classroom, you're a student or teacher, you're very, very safe. And a shooter from outside, it's very difficult for them to break in and try to shoot up a classroom. But once the gunman entered the classroom, Arredondo says, that sort of turned the tables and made the law enforcement.
And
Arredondo says that.
Oh, and we just lost the last part of what you said, James. Forgive me asking you to repeat, but the signal froze, and I want our listeners to hear every bit of this because you were explaining how, while that safety mechanism, that door that was so difficult to open and designed to protect those inside, could work against law enforcement in a case like this. So if you don't mind kind of picking up there because your audio dropped out.
Right. So those doors are designed to keep the people inside safe. But once the gunman goes inside the classroom, then that sort of flips the table. It puts the law enforcement in the position of being outside. And so there's a gunman inside. The police don't know if there's other potential victims or potential survivors. And that's the situation that Arredondo said he was in. He said he then called for SWAT and for extraction tools and for keys to try to get inside. But that was an agonizing delay for him and the other officers, and it was a very long time until they were able to get the keys to be able to shoot the gunman.
It's just so heartbreaking looking at those pictures of those babies lost here. And I know the chief told you, James, that his strategy was to save as many of those kids as possible. What did he say to that point, please?
Right. So once he figured out that the door was locked and that it was going to be very difficult for them to get inside, he did call for extraction tools and keys. But while they stood there, they weren't just waiting around and doing nothing, he says. He says that the officers in the hallway made a call to get the students and teachers in the surrounding classrooms outside of the classroom where the gunman was evacuated through breaking windows. And that's the action that they took. So that's why he defends the law enforcement response and saying that they were doing the best they could under the circumstances that they were in.
And I learned through your reporting, James, that the chief himself was a graduate many years ago of Robb Elementary School, right?
That's correct. He went to Robb Elementary. He's a native of Uvalde. He worked 16 years for the Uvalde Police Department. It is a very personal tragedy for him, including family members through marriage who died. One of the teachers was married to his second cousin. Another one of the teachers killed by the gunman was the wife of a school district police officer. So it's very close to him.
Understandably so. And I know through the piece you did, which is just excellent, you really took a deep dive into this issue, not only getting Chief Arredondo's perspective and what he says happened from his point of view, but also in conducting interviews with your own law enforcement experts to assess what he did. What did they share with you in terms of analyzing what he did on that day?
Right. So I think readers and your viewers would be right to take Arredondo's account with a grain of salt. We ran what he told us through law enforcement experts. And while they saw his point, they still were very critical. They said that leaving behind his police radios was a critical mistake. Not setting up a clear incident command was also a clear mistake. And they were critical of the decisions that he has made. He's tried to explain the reasons why he did the things that he did. But overall, 6 out of the 7 law enforcement experts that we spoke to said that he made critical mistakes.
It's just tragic, and everyone's hearts are so heavy with this news. You're there doing so much reporting on this incident surrounding it. I wanted to just give you this opportunity. We're grateful for your time tonight answering our questions about your interview with the chief. Is there anything else that's really important to know, James, that you think we should be asking you, that we haven't so far tonight, that you think our viewers and listeners around the country would want to know about this incident in Uvalde?
Well, I think that the police chief, in giving us this interview, he recognized that this has become an incident of national attention and that he's received a lot of scrutiny. He wanted to contextualize the information and the response so that people outside of Uvalde, outside of Texas, would understand why they made the decisions that they made. I think there are still clearly open questions, and I think that the scrutiny will continue. But one thing to remember is that outside of the Texas Department of Public Safety, which has put out some information, some inaccurate information, and then had to take it back, Pete Arredondo is the only law enforcement official that has publicly told his side of the story as of now. And I think that is something worth remembering. He wants to put it on the record. He's putting his name on it. And these are the words that he's giving us.
And he shared it with you. James Barragan, thank you so much for your time tonight and for your excellent reporting on this.
Thank you.
What I want to do now is bring in 2 of our law enforcement experts guests joining us tonight on the program to weigh in on all these new details we're learning, in particular what we were able to glean from that interview that our last guest did with the chief there in Uvalde. We have with us in Nashville, Tennessee, retired police sergeant Melissa Pinkleton is on the show, and joining us in Atlanta, Georgia, former police officer and sheriff's deputy and former police investigator Joe Ested. Great to see you both. Thank you for your time tonight. Sergeant, I'll begin with you, if I may, please. Tell me, what jumped out at you the most in the new information that the chief was sharing about things from his perspective with the Texas Tribune?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. What stood out to me most is, in all of my years of law enforcement, his statement is one of the most incredulous things I've ever heard. When you're going to an active shooter situation, the most important thing, aside from your weapon, is your radio, because it is the way that you communicate with all of the other people on the scene and all of the other EMS and anybody else. And I want to explain something for your viewers. We keep hearing incident command. I think a lot of the public doesn't know what incident command is. So incident command is a module that has been set up nationwide by police departments for major incidents. A lot of times it'll be done for parades, it'll be done for other major events that are planned, but this is an event that absolutely incident command should be set up. And the person responsible for incident command usually is the first person on the scene until a supervisor shows up. So you have the chief of police that is saying that he is responding to an active shooter situation and didn't bring his radio so that he could hold his gun better. I don't care if I had to stuff the radio in my shirt or in my pants. You have to bring the radio along with your weapon, because when you get there, you are command. You are responsible for that entire town, for the entire incident going on, and you need to be able to have that radio to communicate with EMS, the fire department, SWAT negotiators. And actually, SWAT negotiators should have been an afterthought, because they should have continued to proceed and engage the shooter. So that is what I have to say about his statement.
Sergeant, appreciate that. Joe Ested, I want to go to you, and with the same question, if you don't mind, please. Tell me what was jumping out at you when we heard these new details that the chief offered to the Texas Tribune.
Thank you for having me on the show again. I don't mean to reiterate and repeat what the sergeant said, but she is absolutely correct. The most important thing is your radio, your equipment. He's the first officer on the scene, and he doesn't even know that he's in command. It's a total lack of police protocol, police responsibility. We're talking about the chief of police. If anybody knows the procedures, it should definitely be him. We had children in there that was getting murdered. And you mean to tell me he took 70 minutes to break into that classroom? It's just unacceptable. This guy has absolutely no reason to be a police chief. He shouldn't be in law enforcement. This is sad, and I heard the reporter say that 6 out of 7 guys said that he dropped the ball. Well, that 7th guy, he needs to remove himself from law enforcement if he believes that the chief responded accordingly. There's no excuse for this. We do a lot of training on active shooting since the Sandy Hook, and you're trained to immediately find that threat and eliminate that threat. Now, I get it. It's an active shooter. I understand lives might have been lost anyway if they responded correctly, but he definitely could have minimized the amount of lives lost if he would respond like he should have responded.
Joe Ested, Melissa Pinkleton, I'm so glad we have you both with us on the program tonight. Thank you for all of that. When we come back, we'll talk about that city council meeting that was just had in Uvalde, where community members are seeking answers, understandably so, to this horrific tragedy.
Free at thezebra.com now.
We need answers to what happened at the school. There's an investigation going on, and we'll find out what happened. I want those answers just like everybody else. I want to be transparent. I want to be clear.
That was the mayor of Uvalde, Texas, Don McLaughlin, saying he wants answers to questions surrounding the tragic shooting at Robb Elementary School. New information is still emerging tonight, and we know it took more than an hour for police to enter the classroom and confront the shooter. Now, a teacher who was inside of the school and survived says he heard the children calling out to police who were retreating. Funerals are still underway. Some families are struggling quietly, and others are demanding accountability quite publicly. At the same time, the Texas Tribune is reporting that the Uvalde City Hall locked its doors during business hours, and leaders have largely locked out public scrutiny. Newsy's John Moan went to a city council meeting looking for answers.
2 weeks ago, Emery Jo Garza was a happy fourth grader at Robb Elementary, an ardent Girl Scout full of excitement, dreaming of summer and of one day becoming an art teacher. 1 week ago, this community laid her to rest, and on Tuesday, her parents are honoring the vibrant 10-year-old they loved so much.
She liked to play with stuff that made a mess, you know, Play-Doh, kinetic sand, was it? Kinetic sand. She liked to make her own slime. Like she liked to play with stuff that made a mess, and you know, I was like, whatever, just clean it up, right? But I mean, she had a real strong personality, and I mean, she didn't deserve this, and none of the kids did, you know.
Her father, Alfred Garza, came to the city council looking for answers. What he heard was deflection.
Again, I don't have the authority to do that. It'd have to come from the school board or Superintendent Harrell.
The council referring any questions about the role of School Police Chief Pete Arredondo to the school board. Their next meeting isn't until June 20th, and Garza is frustrated.
My main priority is to honor my daughter's name. That's not going to change, and to be an advocate for change.
One notable absence from today's emergency hearing was Arredondo himself, who besides being school district police chief also sits on the council. The mayor says he and Arredondo haven't spoken in more than a week. He also expressed frustration about the investigation into one of the deadliest mass school shootings since Sandy Hook Elementary.
Well, we were told one thing one day, and the next day the narrative changed. You were told for a week that a teacher propped the door open with a rock, and at the end of the week, that story was gone too. That's the missteps I'm talking about. But look, I'm not here to try this. We want facts and answers just like everybody else.
Arredondo didn't show up. Garza did, and promises to keep showing up until he gets answers to how his daughter died and why police outside allowed it to happen.
Something could have been done more that day. I don't think they acted like in a timely manner. I mean, obviously we all know that, right? That's all public information now. They did take a long time to get in there and stuff. So I think there's more that could have been done.
Garza also says the school district should shut down its summer school session, adding his stepson is too traumatized by the events of May 24th to constructively learn.
They have no business being in a classroom right now. They need to be with families. They need to, you know, kids are very, you know, even our stepson, you know, has a hard time accepting this information and accepting death. You know, like children don't know how to process that.
And national correspondent John Moan with our Sisters Network Newsy is joining us live tonight from Houston, Texas. Big welcome to you, John. And also want to welcome in Pasadena, California, former gang homicide detective Donald Schweitzer. Great to have you both on the show. John, let me begin with you, if I may, please. Tell us more, if you will, about that emergency session that you went to today.
It was supposed to be a performative act. It actually happened about a day and a half ago, but it was supposed to be a performative act where the city council had a quorum to then agree by consensus to extend its disaster declaration, which enables it to accept state aid from the state of Texas. State of Texas has rushed in there. It's providing all sorts of emergency services. We were all wondering if embattled School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo was going to show up, because he is also a newly minted city council member. He was a no-show. So that's why we were paying attention to that particular meeting, to see if he might show up, because until that article in the Texas Tribune, he has been silent.
Right. Speaking of that Donald Schweitzer, let me bring you in on that point. We were just talking with one of the writers of that article, reporter from the Texas Tribune, James Barragan, and he got this exclusive interview with the chief, and we know that many in the piece of journalism that they put forth were very critical. Many law enforcement experts, you yourself are one. Tell me, was there anything about what the chief did that day that you find highly improper?
Well, you know, it depends on if you're talking about improper for a typical police chief in a small town in America. You know, this town was only 15,000 people, a very tiny police department. And let's be real here, is that most chiefs of police are not commanding officers on scenes like this. They're more administrators. They're people that are not really trained to do this. He made a lot of mistakes, without a doubt. He should have set up a command post. He should have had his radio. He should have set a perimeter. But don't think that there's going to be different results throughout America if something like this happens again. You need a well-trained force to go in there rapidly. And unfortunately, small towns like this don't have the funds or the real ability to respond quickly and make the decisions for a crisis entry. This chief, I'm sure, had no idea as to how to make that decision and whether or not it would be the right decision at the time.
I appreciate it, Donald Schweitzer. John Moan, back to you, if I may, please. I know you're there on the ground talking to a lot of different people, I would imagine a lot of parents. Share with us, if you would, please, the kinds of things that they're sharing with you at this point.
I think, look, as we have this drip of information about what was wrong about the initial account, and now this new narrative from Pete Arredondo, there is a growing sense of confusion, but also burgeoning anger. Confusion as to why did it take so long, and then anger, you probably could have done something had you gave an order to interdict faster. And I think most people that I've spoken to have come to the conclusion that there was no command nor control of the situation, even if you had the Uvalde CISD cops there, as well as the local police from Uvalde, as well as you had federal agents, you had Border Patrol there, you had the DPS troopers there. It didn't seem to be that to anybody I've talked to, whether they're a community member at arm's length from this tragedy or a parent directly connected to it, that there was any command or control of the situation. People were confused. I mean, you know, they're willing to give the benefit of the doubt, but they're certainly growing angrier the more they hear about what's going on. Another thing I should add is, like your experts, I reached out to various retired and active law enforcement officials at the local level, even at the federal level, and they were all befuddled why the police chief didn't bring his police radio. One even saying, any police officer is perfectly capable of keeping that radio on their person while drawing a firearm.
I appreciate that, John. Detective Schweitzer, I want to ask you, please, about something the chief said in that interview with the Texas Tribune, and that was that he never thought he was the incident commander. Your thoughts on that, please?
Well, obviously, he was the highest ranking officer there, and he should just look around and say, hey, is there anybody here that I've appointed to do that? Typically in a police department, you're going to have people that are designated for that purpose. In the larger departments, you're going to have SWAT teams arrive, and you're going to have a clear commander. But in a small town like this, he was the commanding officer. It was his duty to take charge.
Mm-hmm. Looking at these pictures, I mean, it's just beyond heartbreaking. It's unthinkable, yet it happened, and people want answers. John, tell me, in your talks with various folks throughout the community there, what comes next? What are they sharing with you in terms of what's next? Today, tomorrow, next week?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Look, we cover these tragedies on a national scope. We come in, we put a microscope on the pain, and then when we retreat and we're doing more digging into the details of the story, life has to go on for these folks. And one of the big issues is mental health. Here's a county that has a distinct lack of access to mental health, because you've got, in as much as 25% of people who live in Uvalde County, according to the U.S. Census data from 2020, are uninsured or underinsured. Underinsured, probably even more. You also have a 19% poverty rate. So there's everyday struggles for those parents. Maybe some of them are working 2 or 3 jobs or working very long hours, and school is where their children go to learn, but it's also gives the parents the lifeline so they can go work. Well, now you have a situation where if the parents haven't been, burying their own children, you've also have parents who are dealing with traumatized kids and they don't know where to go to look for therapy. So you have very much a town with an open wound, whether you're directly affected by this tragedy or you're somebody who knew another person, and the degrees of separation, go on and on. There is a gaping wound in the Uvalde community, and a lot of that is about, learning about the pain people felt even before this tragedy happened.
Very well said, John. Thank you for that. Detective Schweitzer, to you, in terms of what the police department there can learn from this, or what other departments around the country can learn, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, it's a cry that's been made throughout the decades. I mean, police departments are inadequately ready for these type of situations. I mean, even fairly larger departments are. They need to think about having a rapid force and have contingency plans for this. Small departments, middle-sized departments, they're not training for this. And this would be a good lesson that, you have to organize quickly and have some type of a plan. If you go in there without a plan, you're going to get the same result every time.
Certainly, and to train, there needs to be adequate funding. I can't thank you both enough for coming on the program and sharing all of your insight. John Moan, Donald Schweitzer, thank you both kindly for being with us tonight here on Closing Arguments. We're going to squeeze in a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the FBI's active shooter response training for law enforcement. Did the officers in Uvalde follow the correct protocols? More on that is next.
Denny's.
Officers are there, the initial officers, they receive gunfire. They don't make entry initially because of the gunfire they're receiving. But we have officers calling for additional resources. Everybody that's in the area, tactical teams, we need equipment, we need specialty equipment, we need body armor, we need precision riflemen, negotiators.
Critics have pointed out the failure of law enforcement officials' response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, that left 19 students and 2 teachers dead. Now, following the fatal shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, the Federal Bureau of Investigation created the agency's Active Shooter Response Program, which outlines law enforcement's official guidelines for responding to an active shooter situation. Now, according to the program's creator, officers are required and trained to pursue the shooter, meaning listening to the sounds of the shooting, moving towards where they believe the shooter is, even if it means breaking through or shooting through a door. Now, the objective is to simply locate the gunman. And once the shooter is located, then law enforcement officials are trained to neutralize the shooter. Now, at a press conference, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Stephen McGraw, said that the police commander did not consider this an active shooter situation at the time and thought no more children's lives were in danger.
The on-scene commander considered a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, you know, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation and not a barricaded subject. For the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can.
I want to bring in my guest now for some analysis. Joining me in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, operation planning expert and retired DEA supervisory special agent Brian Averi. And in Westchester, New York, former senior special agent with the DEA and the founder and CEO of Global Security Group, David Katz. Big welcome to you both. Thank you for being on the program tonight. David, I'd like to start with you, if I may, please. I know you've got an awful lot to say about this. First, let's start with what went wrong in your view, please?
Okay, I want to be very, very clear. You can talk about setting up incident command. You could talk about the incident commander. You could talk about training tactical teams and how small departments don't have resources. We have learned that there is no time for anything of that sort. The first law enforcement officers who arrive on that scene go. That means they go if they're receiving fire, if they're risking their lives. That's what they need to do. You know, when I was in I would say the middle of the 1990s, when actually Brian Avery, who you have on, a mentor of mine, actually got me down to my post at Quantico. When I was down there, I was the training liaison with the Israeli Security Agency. They knew more about active shooter back then than we still know now. And the first thing they say is this: attack the shooter. If the shooter is being attacked, the shooter has to fight back. The shooter has to defend, and if they are, they're not shooting their victims. If the first officer goes down, the next officer goes, and so on until the shooter is down. There are no tactical teams. There is no time. These incidents unfold so rapidly and are so unpredictable. Anyone talks about bringing in a team and thinks that's the way to engage and address these situations is way off the mark. It's the individual officer who arrives first.
David, appreciate it. Brian Averi, I want your take on this incident.
Well, thank you, Dave. Julie, here's a situation that most of us, particularly in the federal agencies, have trained for, and that is hostage rescue, okay? And that would fall under, that is what is now called active shooter. So just the way Dave underlined it there, when it's time to go, everybody, that's all the enforcement personnel, should have been trained up to a certain level, have the proper resources, have a team leader if one is available, there should be. You only need 2 for a team. That's all you need. Okay, me and you, me and Dave, whoever. And you have to go. In this particular situation right here, there was obviously an active scene, obviously gunfire, and there were victims and both medically in a distress situation and being actively shot. I don't understand in any law enforcement capacity, and I've taught inside the United States all kind of emergency services teams and outside the United States. And I taught this to the National Academy at Quantico, which, by the way, is all the recommended, highly recommended chiefs, state, police agency executives come to Quantico for a National Academy. And this was taught. It was back, again, sometimes a name change. Hostage rescue, could be in an undercover situation. Could be in a situation where some form of operation with a undercover agent has gone awry and you have to go. It's just a tragedy that somebody didn't understand the risk element and the formula for risk, which still stands. It's resources divided by time. You just think about that for a second. Resources divided by time. If you don't have any resources and no time, what do you have? Just like Dave described. It's only you and me, whoever it is, whoever the officers are on the scene. We hear what's going on. We can see it. We get in the best we can, which they didn't even have that covered. There are resource officers. They didn't have that. They didn't have active way to get into the schools. They had to get a janitor for the keys. They should have had systems in their cars that would hook to some digital system to get in. The door should have been unlocked by the chief, something of that nature. And then after that, it's a go situation. You have to address it as it comes to you. And that requires, one of the attorneys you had on earlier, I caught a little bit of what you said, that requires unbelievable training. And why we're not getting the message from Columbine to Florida and Sandy Hook is beyond me. I just don't understand it. Myself and Dave were blessed in the federal agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, U.S. Customs, Marshal Service, highly trained, shooting program second to none. And it was just beyond unacceptable. It's just totally unacceptable to operate in command leadership lack of like this.
Brian Avery, David Katz, so glad we have you both on the program tonight. We have more questions for you. When we come back after this break, we're going to talk about some possible solutions to mass shooting incidents and see what solutions might be able to be employed to prevent innocent lives from being lost. We thank you for being with us tonight here on Closing Arguments.
Someone wanted to take her life. All I can hope is that she's just not a number. Hopefully something gets resolved. That's all we ask. Hopefully something gets resolved.
Privacy simplified.
In the reel that keeps scrolling across my memories, she turns her head and smiles back at us to acknowledge my promise. And then we left. I left my daughter at that school, and that decision will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Those were the parents of one of the students lost in that horrific shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And we want to end this hour of closing arguments with a discussion with our Court TV law enforcement experts on some possible solutions to this horrific problem. Let me bring back in my guests. I have joining me retired DEA Supervisory Special Agent Brian Avery is joining us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and former Senior Special Agent with the DEA and founder and CEO, of Global Security Group, David Katz. Great to have you both on the program. We could talk for hours about this, but let's talk solutions if we can in the limited time we have on the show here. Brian, let me go to you first, please. What should be done?
Sure, absolutely. Julie, right off the top of my head, my specialty was running state and local task forces where most of your listeners live, small communities, small towns, and I was the federal supervisor of the best that they had. And the way that we addressed every situation is, and it goes from the top down and then back up again. What does that mean? That means that the local supervisors of, say, the federal agencies gets together with Uvalde PD, gets together with the DPS, get together with the Texas Rangers, and they go over policies under critical incidents for bringing these officers, agents, and troopers together. Number two, they have to put it in their budgets. And I was looking at the 40% budget of Uvalde, and for the love of me, why they don't have gear where they should be is beyond me. But it comes all the way down to the operator, from the top, from the executives, and it's a continuous problem. I did it for 3 decades, particularly more in DEA. I was a task force supervisor for at least 10, 15 years, and during that time, I had this exact problem on operations all the time. Lack of cooperation up and down, and lack of coordination in their training, using their budgets to provide a proper resource, and then involving the public. They should have had drills in these schools over and over again. So that's really kind of a pet peeve that I left the agency with, unfortunately, and that's what I see.
Appreciate it, Brian. David Katz, same question to you, please. Solutions.
Two right off the bat. First of all, individual officers need to be trained in a realistic manner. I mean, Brian, I'm preaching to the choir with Brian, I know that. You go to most police departments, the firearms programs are wholly inadequate. And I will suggest to you this: having the officers show up to the range once or twice a year, putting 50 rounds on a piece of paper target, and blessing them, saying you are now qualified to go back on the street, that is complete negligence. Officers need to be trained to shoot quickly, accurately, while on the move, while engaging a hostile suspect who is also moving. That's number one. Number two, equipment and tactics. In the next couple of months, I can't really talk about it much now, but my company is introducing a tactical tool that I think will change this dynamic, to allow officers with a modicum of training to get in quickly, to feel safe and secure that they're going to make it out alive. So those two things, training and proper equipment, but more importantly, the idea that's fundamental here is you go. There is no waiting. There is no delay. I would rather, and I'm sure every law enforcement guest you have will agree with me here. I'd be less afraid than going in and trying to take out that shooter than I would be having to live the rest of my life knowing that I cowered outside while children are being murdered.
It's chilling thinking about that. And David and Brian, I appreciate your thoughts. I wish we had more time to talk to you both, but with about a minute left, I want to give you each an opportunity. Some final thoughts about this, things that are important that you think people should be thinking about if they're watching this program tonight. Brian.
Yes, absolutely, Julie. Go to, go to your town councils, go to your school meetings, completely, unequivocally go after your leaders and say, what do we have for our school security? Make them accountable. That brings in the police chief, the state police, the federal agencies, the constables, whatever you have, and hold them accountable for training their personnel.
Absolutely. Great advice. David, your thoughts, please.
Every parent who has a child in school needs to ask the question of the school council, of the principal, of the school board, of the director. How difficult would it be for a motivated evildoer to get access to the school? Harden the school, make sure there's one point of entry, make sure it is difficult. It's not going to be impossible. Make sure it's difficult. Give people time. Train the people in the school, train the students, train the teachers, give them a chance to react in the event of such a horrible that may befall. They at least have preparation, and they can at least be comfortable with the fact that they have seconds, minutes to gather their kids, to get them to safety, and keep the shooter out, allowing law enforcement to arrive and do their job.
Excellent insight and advice from you both. David Katz and Brian Avery, thank you kindly for being on the program tonight. Looking forward to talking with you both much more as the days and weeks go on. When we come back here on Closing Arguments, we're going to turn our attention to the kitchen knife murder trial. All the latest from today's proceedings are next.
Smarter greens from Force Factor.
In Orlando, Florida, Michael Redlich married his stepdaughter Danielle, and they stayed together for 17 years until he ended up dead inside their home. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at some of the police recordings that were played today in the courtroom.
The court and proper jurisdiction to be disposed of. I did not murder my husband. Please, I don't understand the jargon.
Plus, we'll take a closer look at the relationship between the defendant and her former stepfather turned husband. What impact could their bizarre romance have on the jury?
For the record, I really wanted the Romeo and Juliet story. I wanted a soulmate to trust, melt into, be there for, even die for if it came down to it.
On the docket in Orange County, Florida, the Suitcase murder trial. Sarah Boone is accused of locking her boyfriend in a suitcase and taunting him while he died.
Now tell me exactly what happened there.
My boyfriend and I were playing last night, and I put him in a suitcase and we were playing. And it's like kind of hide and seek kind of thing.
Plus, in Kansas City, Missouri, a woman has won a $5.2 million settlement against Geico. She claims she contracted an STD while having sex in her then-boyfriend's car, which was insured by Geico. Tonight's 13th juror question, should Geico have to pay her? Buckle your seatbelts. This hour of closing arguments starts right now. Good Friday evening to you and welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Julie Grant. Vinnie has the night off. So today marked day number 2 in the kitchen knife murder trial in Orlando, Florida. The defendant is a woman named Danielle Redlich. She's accused of murdering her husband, Michael, who, by the way, was also her stepfather for a time. Now, police say it took her 11 hours to call 911 after he was stabbed to death. And they say that there's lots of evidence showing she had a lot of time to clean up the crime scene. Now, today, the jury heard from a slew of detectives, forensic experts, and people who knew the victim very well. Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae gives us a closer look at today's proceedings.
Julie, the testimony in the case today centered on the digital details. Just what was Danielle Redlich doing in those 11 hours from the time that she stabbed her husband and then called 911? The prosecution brought in a line of witnesses to explain to the jury what her cell phone revealed. Now, the Redlich's relationship, it had its time on and off the rocks. Both sides agree to this. Danielle filed for divorce the year before, but the pair had attempted to reconcile. Here's what she told a detective from her hospital room the day after Michael's death.
He found a text from another man to me, and we had some issues in the last year. He basically cheated on me, and it was a big, long, drawn-out thing, and we finally came around to living together again and possibly trying to work it through, but I think that really wasn't happening.
Hours before crime scene technicians descended on the home, Danielle spent some time checking her dating profile and messages on Meet Mindful. The owner of that relationship app took to the stand to bring in that damaging data.
This is evidence that the user of this particular dating website on January 12, 2019, interacted with your dating website.
That's correct.
And specifically, what time?
5:22 a.m. Mountain Standard Time.
All of this happening before she called 911 at around 9:30 later that morning. The jury also learned that she texted a friend. This after attorneys say she stabbed and fled in fear from her husband.
Did you ever hear from Danielle again?
No, not that evening.
Not that evening, okay. Would you hear from Danielle the next day?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you hear from Danielle the next day?
I received a text from her that morning just asking if I could keep Sawyer after the next morning's football game because there was a family emergency.
Coming up on Monday, Julie, we expect that the prosecution is going to be calling to the stand the medical examiner. They didn't have time to get to that person today, but that's going to be explaining to this jury exactly what those stab wounds or wounds look like, singular or plural. The defense says it was just one fatal wound, but prosecution says there were defensive wounds on Michael Redlich's body. All of that coming up next week. Reporting in downtown Orlando, Julia Janae with Court TV.
Now, the first witness this morning was Detective Pamela Ware, and she executed 2 search warrants for Danielle Redlich, one of them for a DNA sample, another one allowing investigators to acquire passwords and any additional evidence they may need from her. But what was really interesting when the detective was doing this was she recorded some audio of her conversation with the defendant, where you can hear Danielle Redlich get kind of combative. Take a listen.
It is further directed that any evidence or property seized under this warrant shall be brought before a court in proper jurisdiction to be disposed of.
I did not murder my husband. Please, I don't understand this jargon.
To upon request, ordered and sealed this 16th day of January 2019, signed by Judge Gail A. Adams. Okay. What don't you understand?
You're saying the saliva, when there was resuscitation done, that's secondary murder?
No, I'm collecting saliva standards from you, as is in this warrant, to be tested.
Because of the resuscitation?
Because of other evidence that we have collected.
I don't understand. Tell me what's really happened. I don't understand. Tell me what they're looking for? I don't know. Is that enough?
We also have a search warrant to collect any other evidence that we think is necessary. I told you we have a search warrant for the house to search for any other items that we think are necessary for the case.
But mother not giving you her back in that. So they break down with guys. And then you're doing your job at the same time. I have no chance for defense or anything.
I'm not asking any questions, Ms. Redlich. I'm just here to ask you to search warrants.
All right, the defendant clearly not liking that process there. Let me bring in our think tank tonight and see what they think about the kitchen knife murder trial. Joining us in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy's on the program. In San Diego, California, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Brian Watkins is with us, and you can contact him at brianwatkinslaw.com. And last but certainly not least, in Cleveland, Ohio, criminal defense attorney Ian Friedman's on the show as well. Wow. I was just saying to our show producers, what a great think tank we've got tonight, and what a great trial this is. Oh my goodness, where do we begin? Eklund Mercy, let me begin with you, if I may, please. This defendant putting forth the affirmative defense of self-defense, can she be successful with that in your view? Tell us why or why not, please.
I think she can. If counsel manipulates time, they really, this case is all about jury selection. You know, any attorney worth their salt knows that the most important part of a trial, the most important part of any trial, jury trial, is jury selection. So we want to know people who are familiar with death, who are familiar with the suddenness of it, who are familiar with the, oh, I don't know what's going on. So you can really manipulate time. Like, hey, once she found out that he was no longer living, what did she do? At that point, you need to make sure that you can explain the 11 hours. So that's what she needs to do. That is what they need to focus on, because that is where reasonable doubt lies.
Appreciate it, Eklund. Brian Watkins, would you do me a favor, please, and put on that prosecutor's hat? You were once a prosecutor before practicing criminal defense work. And tell me, looking at this from the state's perspective, how does that self-defense claim not fly in your view, please?
they don't know. And that's the funny thing about the prosecution. They're going to put on all the evidence that say that it was a straight murder. The problem is she's got to take the stand and explain all that stuff. And the prosecution doesn't know what her explanation is. She may have a very good one. And if she has a very good one, then the prosecution is really going to be hurting. The problem is I don't even think in my wildest imagination how we could explain a lot of that stuff. Especially if there's forensic evidence such as defensive wounds on the decedent. And so when you got defensive wounds on the decedent, it's going to really cut against anything that she says that was completely self-defense. And juries like scientific forensic evidence over testimony of a defendant. And they'll choose that over testimony of a defendant. So the prosecution has that going for them, but they don't know her explanation. And if she has a great one, they could be in trouble.
Well, and she could be in trouble too, right? With some of these things, as you mentioned, she's got to explain away, the 11-hour time that passed from when he was stabbed. And she first said that he stabbed himself. Then she said he had a heart attack. Ian Friedman, speaking of the defendant testifying, something Brian Watkins just brought up that I wanted to actually ask you about, the preparation for that. If she chooses to take the stand, this is going to be no easy task. And how might her lawyers be prepping her to explain away some of these very bad facts that we know exist?
So, Julie, I think the preparation began probably on day one, right? Because the thought for any defense lawyer is there self-defense here? And so this started a long time ago in questioning her and kind of figuring out how she's going to respond to questions and what her story is. They would have prepped her prior to trial, but we know that they have to wait until all the facts come in from the state's case goes through, and they're going to prep her several more times. Now, you got to be careful. I don't like to over prep someone where they look mechanical, but they're going to have to see how the evidence came in. The questions they're going to pose are going to be in response to some of the assertions that the state is making. She's going to have to be natural, but she's going to have some really clear explanations. For instance, the biggest problems as I see it, and we've talked about it already, I've listened to all three of you and you're spot on this, that the behavior afterwards for that 11 hours, a jury is not going to look at that and it's not acceptable on its face. I agree with Eklund. Hopefully in the jury selection process, defense counsel really hit on the fact that no one knows how they're going to act after such a situation. And she lost her mind. She didn't know what to do, et cetera. She has to explain all of that. The fact that bothered me last we spoke about it, still bothers me today is the dating app in the morning. I can understand the cleanup and everything else, but being on the dating app for 2 hours is a problem. She's going to have to talk about that, and she's got to look at that jury, and she's got to say, yes, I didn't have any choice when I did this. He came at me. I defended myself. She's got to tell that story, but she also has to tell them why she said and did what she did, which seems to be inconsistent with the victim that she'd have to say she is if she went the defense route.
Yes, that was a very bad fact that came out today, absolutely. And Eklund, I want to go back to you, if I may, please. I took a look at our trial notes on this one, at the makeup of the jury, because you were saying how important that is from the outset. You're absolutely right. So the makeup here, we've got 8 jurors right now, and in the end, it'll be 6 in Florida that will be hearing this case, so 2 alternates. Presently, there are 2 women and 6 men hearing this case. Any thoughts on how that may affect the jury's decision on these facts as we know them?
Well, I think that, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think that the stepdaughter fact won't matter as much for the men on the jury versus the women. I believe that after they've been married, I heard that they were married for 17 years. I think after the 10 years, that whole stepdaughter story is just down the drain because they're in it for the long haul. And you can see that. So I think that having men on the jury would definitely negate the shock and awe about the whole stepdaughter situation. So I think that that's a helpful thing. Now, hopefully the defense did their job and really focused on, have you ever lost a loved one? Have you ever lost somebody to a traumatic experience? Have you, seen murder before or things of that nature? And hopefully they hammered down on that and, the trauma that comes about that. And another thing too, ADHD, we are in a Twitter tweet, Facebook, muscle memory. So she may have zoned out and went on her phone. Like, these are things that you can get out of a jury beforehand. You can really, you're not supposed to, but you can definitely try your case during jury selection.
Appreciate it. Eklund Mercy, Brian Watkins, Ian Friedman. Thank you so much. Our think tank's going to stay with us for this entire hour tonight. We just have to step aside, take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at that relationship between defendant Danielle Redlich and her husband, who was first her stepfather. And we're also going to examine an interesting email that she sent him back in May of 2018. Stay right here. Closing Arguments is back after this.
Danielle's mom is separated. Her name is Kathleen. And Kathleen is separated. She starts dating and she meets somebody. Danielle's mom, Kathleen, and this man love each other, and so they move in together. And they're together for 3 years before they get married. And that person becomes Danielle's stepfather. That man was Michael Redlich. 3 months after they get married, Kathleen passes away from breast cancer. And Michael Redlich still has one of Kathleen's daughters, 16-year-old daughter. So he asked Danielle to move into his house and to help take care of her sibling. And she agrees. So she moves in to help take care of her sister. And Michael worked for the Cleveland Browns. And he promises to help give her references, to connect her with job connections. Danielle has a second job at a bar. And Michael starts visiting this bar at night, more and more frequently to visit Danielle. And then soon, Michael starts inviting her to concerts, to events, to things that she's never experienced before. And she's worried about how this relationship will impact her family. But Michael dismisses those concerns.
That was defense attorney Catherine Conlon during opening statements on Thursday, explaining to the jury just how Danielle and Michael Redlich's relationship evolved from stepfather to husband, and it's a relationship that many find odd and unconventional. And today the jury got a good look into the dynamics of their marriage when a very long email from Danielle to Michael was read in open court. Take a listen.
I know I'm bitter at times, I admit, and no, it's not pretty, and I do need to get a grip, as you put it, but you have a lot of nerve as well. Although my words may be cutting, they are only sounds, a dull knife compared to the sharp, disloyal, deceiving, phony, and never-ending selfish knife you continue to twist in my back, as if it's a sport at this point. Of course, someone would be messed up, traumatized, and may act out. I've never met anyone who convinces themselves over and over that their immoral, conniving actions are not just that, but are somehow justified and or reasonable, no matter their cost, harm to others. I notice whenever I confront or attempt to process, work through the cuts your knives wound me with, you have a hard time. Trouble admitting the true nature of just how sharp and dangerous their edges are. There are nonetheless weapons, and you are always claiming the right to hurt me with them. When I ask you about the hurts you put me through, I hate the answers you give me. I mean, how do you love a man who will, because you are acting in agony over the aftermath of his cutting, hurtful actions to begin with? How do you love someone who watches you suffer, go without, fade into, struggle to finish school with no support, not financially, to try and better herself for autonomy and a chance to reclaim the life she always wanted to live? Someone who spites your wishes for respect because they are insecure and angry that you want to be happy. I just want to be happy now. I made up my mind that is what I need to commit to, not a person or marriage, but my own true happiness. What a concept, I know. I think some of us have the subconscious belief deep down that we don't deserve to be happy, or that we don't get to be happy until we have suffered and or bled to death first. Well, I think I might be one of those people, and as illogical as the previous statement is, I have suffered, even bled to death, I'd say. I was hopeful, sweet, full of life and love when I met you. I came with that, and I'm leaving with that. Whether you see it or not doesn't matter anymore. My face may be dirty, and all I have to do is wash away the grit. But a little TLC back into it, and it will shine as clean as it did the day I met you. It's called taking care and deciding to really tend to my happiness. No more sacrificing, no more sacrifice, suffering, begging, pleading, crying, reducing, wasting away, or wondering what kind of scary pain lurks around the corner next. BTW, for the record, I really wanted the Romeo and Juliet story. I wanted a soulmate to trust, melt into, be there for, even die for if it came down to it. Show the depth of my love, and hopefully vice versa. Or just that one person who had your back and you had theirs no matter what, no matter anything. I wanted to be special, and I wanted to treat someone special. Even when the walls came down, I wanted to know that nothing shakes the foundation otherwise. It's the kind of love I wanted our kids to see so they could find it for themselves. Well, I guess you can't take away a person's faith in those things, even if they never come close to them. Or it's just a fairy tale. At least they have something to believe in.
How about how she was looking there as that was being read in open court? Let me see what my think tank thinks about this situation. We've got with us criminal defense attorneys Eklund Mercy, Brian Watkins, and Ian Friedman. Ian, let me go to you first, please, on this one. This lady's got on such a poker face throughout much of this trial. You know, sometimes she'll yawn a little bit, but there were parts there where, like, she was like looking annoyed, and there's so much talk about bleeding and knives. Tell me your thoughts on what effect that could have on the jury who might be watching her.
Yeah, so we as lawyers often tell our clients, stay stoic, no emotions, just we don't want you looking around, because the jury is looking at the defendant. The jury's looking at everything they do. If they raise an eyebrow, if they look down, they roll their eyes, jurors are seeing it. And it means different things to different jurors. We don't want to take that chance, so we address it when we're bringing in the jury. When you're selecting the jury, what are you seeing when you look at our client and all this? We actually tell the clients or the jurors sometimes that, hey, you're not the judge, and we explain to them in closing argument about how they were instructed just to stay there and so forth. I could see her being really just uncomfortable with all of this reading. Now, it could be for many reasons. The prosecutor would say because it talked about knives, but as the defense counsel, I'd say, look, they're sitting there reading a journal, stuff that she kept about the most intimate parts of her life, stuff that was in her personal journal that now all of a sudden we're sitting here on court TV talking about on a Friday night. This is uncomfortable stuff. So that's what I would be saying as defense counsel. Anybody is going to sit there and look uncomfortable, despite the greatest instructions by defense counsel to remain stoic, when these deep desires for love and so forth and all this is out there now, all the stuff from that journal. It's tough stuff. So that's the way I would go with it.
Appreciate it, Ian. Brian Watkins, let me ask you what you think about this. She seemed to use the word knives a lot, bleeding, that word was coming up a lot. And something that I think is just so creepy, and if I were on the side of the prosecution, I would use this thematically throughout the case. I would have really blasted it all over the courtroom in the open, was that Michael Redlich made a comment to, I believe it was a neighbor, and he said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, everything's good as long as you keep the knives away from her. And then when you think about how he died at her hands with a knife, whether or not it was justified or not, that's the question for the jury, we know. But tell me, when you were hearing this, did you think maybe she's got some kind of a sick fixation with knives, or is it just me?
Well, that letter cuts both ways.
No pun intended, or pun intended, maybe.
No pun intended.
Maybe, yeah.
But yes, we have that foreshadowing about her speaking about knives and the cutting and all that type of stuff. But also behind that letter is really a normal relationship. I mean, that is a letter that you'd expect to see from anyone who was contemplating a divorce after 17 years of marriage. I see there a normal relationship that's breaking up and someone going to pursue their happiness. I don't see a lot of anger. I don't see a lot of, allegations of domestic violence or anything like that. I see somebody who wants to move on in a different direction and no longer continue with the marriage, which is very normal. Our divorce rate is very high. So I don't see anything unusual there with the letter, but the foreshadowing of the knife comments. And I think if the prosecution wants to rely on that, I think it's a little bit weak. But I think that she's sitting there, and to me, it looks like she's chomping at the bit to explain everything. She's having this letter read. Those are her thoughts, her personal feelings, and you don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you what I was talking about when I wrote that, and she seems to me anxious to get that chance. So I think the jury's like, hey, let's hear what she has to say about it. So which is a good thing because the jury is curious. They want to know, and she'll have the opportunity to convince them that this was self-defense.
Exactly, Brian. Eklund, to that point, we were listening closely to the opening statements because sometimes we'll hear attorneys promise their client's going to take the stand, and from the outset, and here, we strongly expect it. Everything is pointing to that, but they were very careful in the words they chose, did not promise it. Is that a smart move in a case like this one? Why or why not, please?
Oh yes, I loved it. It was getting the stink out beforehand. It's messy facts. You want to get ahead of it. You want to sanitize it. She was very just dull in her presentation. Like, yes, he married the mom and the mom died of cancer. Like really equating for time. So she really focused on how she lived for 3 months. So these were like really strategic steps that she made. And I think that it actually helped the case. So I loved how like bland it was to really just get to the point.
I never thought anything you say let that Eklund. Yeah,
I really
but I know
did.
what you're saying. I mean, how do you say that? Like he was. I mean, everybody watching. I've had so many people text me and say, "I've heard you say on court TV like this guy was her stepfather." First, you used to stop in your tracks. What? But okay, you think that was the best way to kind of go through that and not promise her testimony, huh?
No, because you also want to give her an opportunity to not testify. We don't know how well the state prepped their witnesses, so we may get a shock. We have no idea. We may get somebody else. We may get other alternative intents or things of that nature. So I think that she played it well. I think that again, she really just has a big 11 hours to equate for. She really needs to account for 11 hours.
Right.
And that's it.
And the knife and the garbage can and the bucket with the water that was all bloody.
Yeah, so she has some stories to tell.
Yes,
we need something for 11 hours. I need 11 hours worth of story. That's what the jury needs.
You're absolutely right. Eklund, Mercy, Brian Watkins, Ian Friedman, great insight from you all. Thank you kindly. The think tank is going to stay with me. Want you to do the same at home, please. We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll turn our attention to the docket. We'll look ahead to the Suitcase murder trial, where defendant Sarah Boone is charged with second-degree murder for the death of her boyfriend. Details are next.
licensed everything.
Welcome back to Closing Arguments. I'm Julie Grant in tonight for Vinnie Politan. On the docket tonight for you, the upcoming Suitcase murder trial. The defendant is Sarah Boone. She's accused of locking her boyfriend inside of a suitcase where he suffocated and died. Court TV anchor Vinnie Politan brings us more of the shocking details surrounding the case.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
It's Monday, February 24th. There's a crisis at the home of Sarah Boone, prompting her to call 911.
Is this a police or medical? My boyfriend is dead. You can send a line for the fire department. Do not hang up.
The fire department takes over the call, and for the next few minutes, officials are obtaining critical details about what happened.
No, tell me exactly what happened there.
My boyfriend and I were playing last night, and I put him in a suitcase and we were playing, and like kind of hide and seek kind of thing. So I fell asleep, and I woke up, and he was dead in the suitcase. So I don't know what happened.
Okay, is he hanging from somewhere or what, ma'am?
No, I pulled him out of the suitcase. I tried giving him CPR.
Fire and rescue instruct Boone on how to give chest compressions.
Just keep on pumping. That's all you need to do for me. Keep on pumping his chest for me. I don't need you to stop and talk or anything. I just want you to count out loud for me, okay?
31, 32. Please hurry.
Okay, man, they're getting there as fast as they can, okay?
He's deaf and he's purple.
EMS arrived within minutes and advised Boone that her boyfriend, Jorge Torres, had been down too long and there was nothing more they could do. Boone explained she and Torres were drinking the night before and thought it would be funny if he got inside of a suitcase for a game of hide and seek. The next day, deputies returned and arrested Boone and charged her with second-degree murder in Torres's death. Boone's story about a childhood game gone awry unraveled when investigators say they found video on her cell phone showing Boone taunting and laughing at Torres while he was struggling to get out of the suitcase. Police say he was yelling he couldn't breathe and asking Boone for help. According to police, Boone was captured on video saying, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me." When confronted with the video, officers say she told them she didn't remember those moments. But to investigators, those moments add up to motive for second-degree murder.
Vinnie Politan reporting there. Let me bring in my think tank. Still with me, Eklund Mercy, Brian Watkins, and Ian Friedman, all excellent attorneys. In this case, this is one for the books, isn't it? Brian Watkins, let me go to you first on this one, please. How do you see this one playing out at trial?
This case hinges on one thing. How did he get into the suitcase? If he voluntarily got in the suitcase, there is no case. If she forced him in with gunpoint or something like that, then she can be found guilty. However, we don't have any evidence that tells us how he got in the suitcase. The only persons that were there were her and him. And so without that evidence, there's no case. If he voluntarily got in that suitcase, she has no legal obligation to help him. Let me give you a good example. I can invite you over to my house for a hot dog eating contest. And I could say, go, and you can start eating the hot dogs as fast as you can and start choking. I have no obligation to help you, and I can sit there and watch you choke to death. The law, we do not have Good Samaritan laws where you're required to help someone who put themselves in a position of peril. And the problem with their also case is she's charged with second-degree murder, which is reckless homicide, which means you know that something is dangerous. I don't know, and I'm speaking for myself. In fact, I'll probably speak for everyone. This is the first time I've ever heard of somebody dying in a suitcase. A suitcase is not an inherently dangerous thing. I mean, my zippers break on my suitcases by just overpacking them. I don't understand why he couldn't kick his way out of that suitcase and break the zipper. So it's unusual type of death. And to say that the suitcase is inherently dangerous and you knew that this was going to happen, therefore you're liable, I think is a stretch. So it's a very interesting case. It's going to be dealt with legally with the appellate court because I think a jury's not going to like her. But legally speaking, there is no legal obligation to help him out of that suitcase.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you know, speaking of that, we've got that piece of the cell phone video. It's short, and I warn you, this is disturbing. But let's play this. This is where you can hear Jorge Torres inside of that suitcase asking her for help.
Sarah. That's my name. Don't wear it up. Sarah, I can't breathe, babe. Seriously. Yeah, that's when you do when you choke me. Sarah.
When she says, "That's my name, don't wear it out," like, can she sound more childish and heartless? Ian Friedman, your thoughts on that, please.
I'm with you on that one, Julie. It does come off callous. But I think there's a lesson to be learned in here. In listening to Brian might be right. But I think there's another 5, 10 theories, maybe even more, that also could be right. My point is, we're only watching a very small snippet here, and we're asking ourselves to kind of make a prediction as to what's going to occur. And I think that that's a mistake that's often made when looking at these cases. I know sometimes when I'm in cases, if I have people watching it, they're speculating. The lawyers on the ground know what's going on in this case. We're going to find out. I guess the point being, and the suggestion is, you have to wait until we see all of the evidence. Brian might be right. He got in there somehow. But if there's evidence, hey, there's no way to zip it from the inside. She had to have assisted from the outside. That's another factor. So this is one, Julie, I'm with you. It's a great interest on this one. And all of these little facts are going to matter. The people have to watch this entire trial, because I don't think that that small snippet tells the entire story. Now, if it does, and that's the whole trial from start to finish, she's got problems. I'm just guessing that's not the whole trial.
Exactly. Great points, Ian. Eklund, tell me, if you were on the defense side of this case, tasked with representing Sarah Boone, knowing that video evidence we just played is going to be coming in, tell me what kind of a defense you think needs to be fashioned for her, please.
Well, you have to explain hide and seek, because hide and seek is indicative of somebody else being in the apartment, because we're trying to find somebody. I don't hide and seek and help you hide. So they're probably playing truth or dare, which is more relatable, which makes more sense. So we already have a problem with that. So I would have to really dissect every moment from start to finish. Like, I want to know what is happening every minute. So I want to know how he got into the suitcase. And then at that point, you can say that, hey, it was a flip of I meant to say truth or dare and not hide and go seek, because hide and go seek indicates that we're trying to find you. If I'm the one who put you in there, I'm not trying to find you. So I think that that's a major, that's a major gap that they have to fix for me, because if I'm a part of the jury, I can't even get over that part.
Appreciate it, Eklund. Excellent points you all are making, and we're going to continue tracking this one at Court TV. Right now, we know there's a pretrial conference set for July 12th, and the trial date has tentatively been set for July 25th. So, coming up. We're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, it's time to hear from you, the 13th juror, and what a question we are asking tonight. We'll be right back.
41.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julie Grant, in tonight for Vinnie Politan. Boy, oh boy, are we turning to an interesting legal story out of Kansas City, Missouri, where, brace yourselves, folks, a woman has been awarded a $5.2 million insurance settlement against Geico. The woman claims she contracted a sexually transmitted disease while having sex in her then boyfriend's car, which was insured by Geico. The woman, identified as M.O., had notified Geico that she was planning on seeking a $1 million settlement from the man and argued that the man's auto insurance provided coverage for her injuries and her losses. However, Geico rejected her settlement offer, saying the woman's claim did not occur because of normal use of the vehicle. Well, an arbitrator then weighed in and determined the woman should be awarded $5.2 million for damages and injuries, a decision that was then upheld on Tuesday by the Missouri Court of Appeals. And now Geico has filed a federal lawsuit arguing the woman's claims are not covered by the man's insurance policy. So we posted this story to our social media pages at Court TV, and we asked you, our 13th juror, should Geico have to pay her? We begin with our comment of the day from Rachel, who says, quote, absolutely not. But the man should be held accountable for not disclosing his positive diagnosis. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, let me bring in the think tank right now, see what they think about this one. I can't even believe I'm asking you all about this. Eklund, help me out and go first, please. Should Geico have to pay up here?
How? How did we get here? Like, how did they negate any other way for her getting HPV, like the one that you can get off of toilet seats? Like, how did they negate every other place she could possibly get this, like, STD? She could have gotten it from a bench, from the gym. They negated all of that and really said it was from this car. I want to know how. Like, I am shocked. I want to know how. Like, it makes no sense. Like, how? How did that happen?
One of our viewers said the same thing. Yeah, on Twitter, fstop414 said, quote, what if the woman had sex at his home? Is his homeowner insurance liable too? Or maybe at the office, would the company be liable? Pure insanity, and I can't believe the court ruled in her favor. Brian Watkins, what do you think about what fstop had to say there?
I agree with him, but this is an internet story, and there's a lot of half-truths on the internet. And if you look deeper into that case, Geico wasn't sued. The man was sued, and he didn't respond to the lawsuit, and she got at a judgment of $5.2 million. The fact that the individual filed a claim with the insurance company didn't pay, now they're trying to basically what we call open the policy, which means Geico would have to pay the entire judgment for what he did. They're not claiming that Geico did anything wrong or the car did anything wrong. So the story comes out a little twisted. However, I do think this is going to get overturned on appeal. The judgment will not stand. Like I said, they didn't even allege that Geico did or the car did anything wrong. The lawsuit was against the guy. The question is does Geico have to pay for the guy's wrongdoing because he was insured by Geico? That's really the question. So when you look at it like that, it's a little less sexy, or maybe that's a bad term, but
you're really on with the puns tonight, aren't you, Brian? I know, one after another. He'll be here all night, folks. Oh my gosh. Well, and to your point you just made, Brian, we got a comment from Raymond. This is a good one. Raymond says Geico should sue her for a frivolous lawsuit. Ian Freeman, what do you think?
I can see why people are outraged by this, right? People hear this and they automatically go back to which one? The McDonald's coffee case, right? We're all thinking about that from 20 some odd years ago. This doesn't happen all the time. So this shouldn't be an example of frivolous suits being out there all the time. The insurance companies give it back every single day. Obviously, you can tell I'm no fan. Now, let me just be clear. The language here in the policy is what is allowing for this. The language says that if someone is harmed while operating or in the vehicle, so it's pretty vague policy. Now, I'll tell you what happened. Right after this happened and this judgment came, you better believe it, that every chief legal counsel for every insurance company got a notice on this one. They're changing the language in their policy at every moment of this. She sued, just as Brian said, Policy allows for it. We'll see what the courts do.
Yeah. And Ian, speaking of great minds thinking alike, you mentioned the McDonald's coffee cup case. Samantha, look at her comment here. She says, this is worse than the McDonald's cup spilling hot coffee on the person. This is a complete joke. There's no way this can hold up. And if it does, then Geico and other insurance companies will have to be pulled into a lot of criminal crimes for what happened in those vehicles, which makes no sense. I love it. Karina tonight writes, quote, Geico is not responsible for her choices. Karina, thank you for that. And Christina wrote on Twitter, opens a can of worms for insurance companies for sure. Thank you all. Great comments tonight. Think Tank, you all are the best. Thank you so much. Eklund, Mercy, Brian Watkins, and Ian Friedman for coming and closing arguments tonight. Have a great weekend. And now it is time for a break where we come back and we have a photograph to show you of a child who isn't home tonight and should be. We'll be right back.
Give Lumi a try today.
Welcome back. Our coverage of the kitchen knife murder trial resumes for you 9 a.m. Monday morning. And before we leave you tonight, we want to show you this picture of 13-year-old Olivia Lewis. Olivia has been missing since May 18th of this year from Winter Haven, Florida. She's 5 feet tall. She has light brown hair and brown eyes. If you have any information on where Olivia is, please don't hesitate to call the Polk County Sheriff's Office at 863-298-6200, or you can call 1-800-THE-LOST. Thank you so much for being with us. Vinnie will be back on Monday. I'm Julie Grant, and as my pal Vinnie Politan always says at this time, don't forget to hug the kids.
In 1991, this tranquil pond in rural Connecticut was the scene of a horrific crime. 2 young boys were beaten, thrown into the water, and left for dead. Investigators had little evidence until they examined the pond itself and found thousands of clues invisible to the naked eye in a simple drop of water.